How I made a modular wargaming board, part 8, the fjord tile. You'll see it just coming up here. So this is an epoxy resin pour river piece with all of these kind of rocks in it and just adding a little bit of something different to the gaming board. Now keep watching because you'll see me actually mess up the epoxy resin pour and what I did in order to resolve it. But before we get that far into it, how is it actually made? Well, just like all of the other boards in the modular board thing, it starts with a bit of foam, which is 30 centimeters square. And then I've begun this by marking in 10 centimeters from each edge so that it matches up with all the other river tiles that I have made. Next up, I've kind of tried to do a 2D interpretation of what's going to be a very 3D design. So the first section I drew is roughly where I thought the river would be, and then these other lines, these secondary lines I'm drawing, is kind of where the forward part of it, where it all kind of lowers down. And then I've drawn out a line along the edge here so I know how far down to cut. And then what I did here is I just used a sharp knife to start cutting chunks out of it. So doing a horizontal line, making sure the blade's nice and flat, and then doing vertical lines down to take out chunk by chunk, as you can see what I'm doing here. So a nice long thin blade like the one I've got here is absolutely ideal. Now, you can do this with a hot wire cutter, and you will see me using a hot wire cutter in a minute, but I wanted to show you that you can do absolutely all of this just with a knife. But if you do have a hot wire cutter or you're thinking about getting one, then you can use it for this. I'll show you exactly how in just a second, and you'll see how much quicker it is and how much easier it is. Now, this is in real time, this isn't sped up. Just notice that the hot wire cutter, just with a small amount of care, just cuts through basically a third of what we needed to cut out here in just a matter of seconds. Done. That would have taken 10 times as long using a knife. And with the angled things as well, you can see both of those happening in seconds. And then I've taken the knife and just cut some corners off. Now with the excess, we're going to be using this for the rocks which are in the bottom. So I just cut off lots of chunks of it like a bad chef who doesn't know how to cut onions. And I tipped them in to see if I had enough, and gave me an opportunity to kind of separate the ones out which weren't very good. Realised I didn't have enough, and then cut out some larger, chunkier ones as well. And the reason I kind of did this is to kind of make sure it's kind of nice and random. To stick them down, I took some PVA glue and grey paint and just covered the bottom of the thing with it, and then just tip them in. I mean, you could do a more secure way of doing it with a glue gun, bit by bit, but it would have taken a lot longer, so I just chucked them in. Had a nice bit of randomness and then kind of moved them around a bit. Took a few more out which didn't quite fit. And also took some out that I thought, you know what, I think that'll look better on the edge of the riverbank rather than in the actual river itself. And once I'd got that into a nice position, I left it for a good couple of hours to dry. As you can see, it's a little bit of a messy job. Yuck. But when I came back, when I tipped it off, one rock fell and that was it. More will come off as you're doing this. I'm moving into kind of sort of a dry brush with a lighter grey paint here. And as you do this, some will come up, and that's absolutely fine. Some came up when I was doing it. This is just adding some highlights to the edges of the rocks and just making them feel a bit more realistic. Then I took some watered down PVA, and what I was doing here is squeezing it into all of the gaps in between the rocks so I can get down to the riverbed, and then I'm sprinkling this fine grey sand to get down there to act as a riverbed. And that's what it ended up looking like after I had done that. Then we're moving on to flocking the riverbanks. So I took some just normal PVA glue, stuck some of the rocks down on that, and then took some battlefield scattered that down at the entrance to the fjord, and then finished the rest of the tile off by using some just standard flock that we've been using on all the other tiles. So that's 3 different flocks just mixed together. So doing that carefully and then pushing it up to the edges with my fingers. To finish up in terms of the painting and the flocking, all I did was just finish off with a light dry brush in white just to add extra highlights to the rocks to, again, add a little bit more realism to them. And there you go. Right, making the dams. This is important. So I took one bit of masking tape and put it sticky side up and one sticky side down, and then you want to attach this to the the tile on its edge so that the non-sticky bit matches up with the entrance to the river thing. It's really important to get this right. If you get this wrong, you're going to cause yourself a lot of mess and a lot of extra work. Trust me, I know, because it happened on one of my tiles that I rushed. So I've put the first one down. The next one's just a standard piece of tape, which you can not see me at all smoothing down. And then a third bit as well, just to cover up where that joins. So you're kind of being triply cautious here. This would probably do by itself, but I went a stage further because I really didn't want any extra work. So these are T pieces of MDF. There's 2 offcuts, which I've just glued into a T shape, leaving one smooth edge. And all you're going to do with this is cover the inside of it with hot glue, and then you're going to stick that as a dam up against the tape there and to the bottom of it as well. And then you're going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. Now, this is being kind of doubly cautious, but I think that given how much extra work and mess I caused myself by rushing it before, I was triply cautious. So this is clear silicone rubber, which you can add in at the edge to stop any epoxy going out. And now the epoxy I'm using is not a really thin one. It's quite viscous, so it doesn't really properly leak out unless you give it the opportunity to, and I really didn't want to. So that's why I use a silicone rubber as well. Now, to mix the epoxy resin, just follow the instructions, or whichever one you get. For my one, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. You mix it for 5 minutes and you let it stand. And then if you want to dye it, then you add some paint. Now, look at this. Literally 5 drops, I think I add. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, 5 drops into several hundred mils of liquid. And look how blue that goes. You do not need hardly any paint whatsoever. And now you can watch me slightly mess this up. So what you want to do with this is tip it in little bits and pieces, because with the surface you've got there, you've got no idea how much is going to fall down in between the cracks and the rocks. So it's good to give it some time. So this is all fine what I'm doing here. Just going bit by bit and just letting it kind of level itself out and then seeing what's going on. And it's all just kind of leveling out very nicely and going absolutely fine. Yeah, no problem so far. Just little bit by bit and just making sure that it's going where you want it to. And very shortly you'll see me mess up. Why have I tipped so much now? What? Yeah. So this is now at the point where I'm going, hang on a minute, I don't want this to be actually that high. What am I going to do about it? I tell you what, we'll put some more in there. That's going to help. This is the point where I kind of went, oh, what am I thinking? What am I thinking? And I spent ages staring at it going, what am I going to do about this? Because I could see that the level was rising. So there's a few things you can do. You can just kind of try and move it into the center to see if it works. I very quickly realized that this was a bit of a thankless task, so I stopped doing that. Next up, you can just try and tip it and see if you can get it more into where you want it to be. But then I realized that both sides were kind of too high. So you can just lift it up and try and move it. Again, bit of a thankless task. And the other thing you do is you can tap it, because by tapping it and giving some vibration, that's a nice shot of my arm there, you can help air bubbles come to the surface, and by air bubbles coming to the surface is because the epoxy is slipping in the gaps between the rocks. This didn't particularly work very well. So eventually I got, this is a cowpole syringe used for giving children medicine, and for a good, I'm going to say 5 minutes, I sucked up a little bits of resin and put it back into the mix, just over and over again, just finding the bits where it was a little bit high, which was basically most of it, and putting it into the thing over and over and over and over again until I got it to a more sensible height. I also took out a few rocks as well so that there was more space for the resin to be, but ultimately just the biggest tip here is just do it slowly. You've got plenty of time to work with this resin, so don't rush the whole thing. Then I added a couple of rocks back in, and it got it down to a more sensible height. And you can see that it actually turned out looking absolutely fine. So with it looking absolutely fine, it was time to make it look prettier. Now, with good enough scenery, you don't have to do this. If you just want it to be good enough, that looks like a river already, you don't need to do this. But this is Vallejo, I think it's Vallejo, water effect. And this is something I use on all the other river tiles. So to begin with, what you're going to do is just paint all of the rivery parts, or anything you want to look like it's got a little bit of water on. So I made sure that I covered all of the water itself, and also put some onto the bank as well, where I feel like it may have splashed up. Now this will dry pretty much clear. If it's very thick, then it will dry a lot whiter. And what you'll see is that I go through along the river, just trying to think about what direction the water would be moving, and just using the bristles of the brush just to try and achieve that kind of result. Once I'd done that and it had dried, I decided to add even more on, because I wanted it to really feel like fast moving water, more like rapids. So I went over with a quick another coat of this, and you will see the results in a minute, and I think it was definitely worthwhile doing. But essentially what I do with the brush is I kind of just drag it and I stipple it, and just try and make the water look like it's traveling in a certain direction. And you can put it on the rocks as well, deliberately, because water would be splashing up onto the rocks and making them look wet. But essentially, the pattern that you see as you're doing it is is a white version of what the clear thing will be. So you can see this is what it ended up looking like. Then you can take your dams off. Probably could have taken off early, but it's nice to leave it a little while. Take the tape off. You may need to cut some of it off because the resin will stick to it quite hard. But that's basically what it looks like. I've now added it to the waterfall tile just because I think they look really cool together. So this is the situation we found. But unfortunately, I definitely added way too much resin, because as you can see, there is a massive step between the other tiles and this tile. So I needed to do something about that. So what did I do? I took some more clear silicone, and I put a bead of it across both edges, but just one edge at a time. So I put a bead across the edge, just like that. And then I got a little screwdriver, and I'm just adding some texture to the silicone, just making it spiky and just adding kind of a waterish kind of texture. And this is kind of going to be overlapping the other tiles, and you'll see that it actually ended up looking pretty alright, I think. And that is the tile completely finished. And here it is on the gaming board, and I think you'll agree that it looks absolutely fantastic. If you want to make this or any of the other things, then there are links in the description of the video for buying everything you'd need in order to do so. If you've liked this video, please like it. If you have anything to say, then please leave a comment, and please subscribe to the channel for more wargaming scenery content. Thanks for watching.